Late 8th century Europe was a land of fear and uncertainty. The once mighty Roman Empire had crumbled, leaving behind a patchwork of small kingdoms and principalities, each struggling to survive. The memory of Roman order lingered in the ruins, scattered across the countryside, but the reality was a world fractured and vulnerable. The Roman Empire was gone, replaced by scattered, warring kingdoms. These new rulers often fought among themselves, unable to unite against outside threats. The roads that once connected the continent had fallen into disrepair, making travel and communication slow and dangerous. People lived in isolated villages, their world small and news slow to travel. Most never ventured far from home, and rumors of distant dangers spread fear and suspicion. Life was harsh, and survival depended on the land and the changing seasons. Into this anxious landscape came a new terror from the north, the Vikings. Their arrival was sudden and unexpected, like a storm breaking over the horizon. No one knew when or where they would strike next. Their dragon ships, fast and agile, could appear anywhere, on coasts or deep inland rivers. These vessels allowed them to travel swiftly, bypassing natural defenses and reaching places thought to be safe. Hardened warriors, they struck like lightning, raiding monasteries and towns before vanishing. Their attacks were brutal and efficient, leaving devastation in their wake and little time for defenders to react. The infamous attack on Lindisfarne in 793 shocked the Christian world, showing that nowhere was safe. The news of the raid spread quickly, sending waves of panic through every monastery and village along the coast. Monasteries, rich but undefended, became prime targets. Their treasures and manuscripts were irresistible to the Vikings, who saw them as easy prey. The Vikings' unpredictability paralyzed coastal Europe with dread. Villagers watched the horizon in fear, never knowing if the next ship would bring trade or terror. Traditional armies were too slow to respond to these hit-and-run raids. By the time help arrived, the Vikings had already disappeared, leaving only smoldering ruins behind. Europe's rulers faced a dire question: how to defend against an enemy who could strike anywhere, anytime. Desperate, they began to rethink their defenses, but unity was hard to achieve in a divided land. The age of the Vikings had begun, and Europe was unprepared. The continent would never be the same, as the shadow of the north spread fear and forced change across the land. Into this chaos stepped Charlemagne, a towering figure whose ambition and vision would reshape the destiny of Europe. As a visionary ruler, he united much of Western Europe under his banner, forging alliances and consolidating power in a time of uncertainty. Charlemagne recognized the Viking threat as a grave strategic danger, far more than just a series of isolated coastal raids. He understood that these Norse warriors could destabilize his entire realm if left unchecked. In response, Charlemagne ordered the construction of a vast network of coastal watchtowers and sturdy wooden forts, stretching along vulnerable shorelines. This early warning system allowed his people to spot Viking ships from afar and prepare defenses in time. He also established a Frankish fleet to patrol the northern seas, a revolutionary move for a land power, signaling a new era of military innovation and adaptability. Charlemagne personally inspected these defenses, riding along the coastlines and overseeing construction. Through his leadership, he forged a protective shield around his empire, inspiring loyalty and vigilance among his people. While Charlemagne lived, his authority and reputation alone were enough to keep the Vikings at bay. Even the fiercest Norse raiders hesitated to challenge the might of the Frankish king. The coastal defenses proved effective, and the Vikings often turned their attention to easier, less defended targets elsewhere, leaving Frankish lands largely unscathed. Charlemagne's vision was clear: a unified, defended empire where his people could prosper in relative safety, protected from the chaos beyond their borders. Yet, the strength of any defensive system depends not just on its design, but on the dedication and vigilance of those who maintain it, year after year. When Charlemagne was gone, The fate of his shield and the future of his empire would be put to the ultimate test. Charlemagne's death in 814 shattered the unity of his vast empire, a realm that had once stretched from the Pyrenees to the heart of Central Europe. His passing marked the end of an era of relative stability and strong leadership. His successors, lacking his vision and authority, soon fell into bitter disputes. They fought among themselves, dividing the realm into rival kingdoms and neglecting its defences, each more concerned with personal power than the safety of their people. Watchtowers rotted on lonely hills, garrisons withdrew from their posts, and the once proud Frankish fleet decayed along the rivers. The infrastructure that had protected the empire for decades was left to crumble. The once mighty shield that had guarded the coasts was gone, leaving the shorelines exposed and vulnerable to attack. The Franks' enemies watched and waited for their chance. The Vikings, ever watchful for weakness, quickly exploited this opportunity. They launched larger, more ambitious raids, striking deeper and more frequently than ever before. No longer content with plundering isolated coastal monasteries, they sailed up great rivers like the Seine, deep into the heart of Francia, sacking major cities such as Paris in 845 and leaving devastation in their wake. The Frankish king, Charles the Bald, watched helplessly as his kingdom was ravaged. Despite his title, he was powerless to stop the relentless Viking onslaught. The Vikings plundered and ransomed Paris, humiliating the Franks and forcing them to pay vast sums for the city's safety. The once proud defenders of Christendom were now at the mercy of northern raiders. The heirs of Charlemagne could no longer protect their people. Ordinary men and women, once secure behind strong walls, now lived in fear, seeking protection where none could be found. The age of large-scale Viking invasion had begun, with fleets of longships sailing upriver and armies sweeping across the land. Francia's defences were in ruins, its towns smouldering, and the entire continent trembled at the threat from the north. The Vikings had found their opportunity, and they seized it with ruthless determination, planning ever bolder attacks on Frankish soil. Europe's vulnerability was now painfully clear, and the age of Viking terror had truly begun. The Vikings fought a war the Franks couldn't match. Frankish knights were powerful in open battle, but slow and inflexible. The Vikings relied on speed, surprise, and their longships, able to strike anywhere, then vanish. Their ships could navigate rivers, bypassing fortresses and reaching deep inland. If blocked, they could even drag their ships overland to new waterways. The Franks' static defences were useless against such mobility. Armies arrived too late. The Vikings were always gone. The psychological toll was immense. Fear and uncertainty spread everywhere. The Vikings' ferocity and unpredictability demoralized their enemies. The Franks realized their old ways were failing. To survive, they had to adapt, change tactics, technology, and mindset. The future belonged to those who could learn from their foes. The Franks began to adapt, slowly and painfully, learning from each hard lesson. They built fortified bridges further inland, creating new choke points to trap Viking ships and block their advance. Light cavalry units replaced slow-moving knights, able to shadow, pursue and harass raiders with greater speed. Early warning networks of lookouts and signal fires alerted entire regions to approaching danger. Communities learned to hide their valuables and livestock, making Viking raids far less profitable. These changes didn't stop the Vikings overnight, but they raised the cost and risk of raiding. Frankish heroes like Odo of Paris emerged, proving the Vikings could indeed be resisted. The Franks were learning, turning defeat and hardship into innovation and resilience. Their new sword was forged from the hard lessons of their enemies' tactics. The tide was finally beginning to turn in their favor. Despite improvements, the Franks couldn't expel the Vikings entirely. Some rulers tried a new strategy: make the Vikings allies. Viking leaders wanted land, not just loot. In 911, King Charles the Simple offered Rollo, a powerful Viking, the land around the Lower Seine. In return, Rollo had to convert to Christianity, swear loyalty, and defend the coast from other raiders. Rollo accepted, was baptized, and became the first ruler of Normandy, the land of the Northmen. The Normans combined Viking seafaring with Frankish cavalry, becoming Europe's best coastal defenders. The Seine was closed to further Viking invasion. The Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte turned former enemies into protectors. Normandy became a powerful buffer state. The wolf was now guarding the sheepfold. Diplomacy had achieved what war could not. For ordinary people, survival meant vigilance and ingenuity. They relied on local knowledge, not distant armies. Lookouts watched for signs of raiders, birds, sails, or animal behavior. When danger came, families hid valuables, drove livestock into forests, and vanished into the landscape. Earthwork enclosures and natural refuges became sanctuaries. Survival was about disappearing, not fighting. Communities endured by working together and using their land as a shield. Their resilience was the quiet backbone of Europe's survival. The Frankish struggle with the Vikings was a lesson in adaptation. Charlemagne's centralized empire proved too rigid for a new kind of war. Decentralization and innovation became essential. Local lords gained power, laying the groundwork for feudalism. The Franks learned from their enemies, adopting speed, mobility, and even the Vikings themselves. Normandy's creation was a masterstroke, turning raiders into defenders. The Normans would later shape Europe, most famously with William the Conqueror's invasion of England. The Viking Age forced Europe to reinvent itself, militarily, politically, and culturally. The continent emerged tougher and more dynamic. Endurance came not from resisting change, but from embracing it and turning threats into opportunities.